All right. So we're continuing our study of biblical identity, and over the last couple of weeks, we've been um, we've had this newish word that I have shared and challenged you with, and it was the word of agreement. And Terry came up to me before and was telling me that she dislikes me. And maybe you can all find agreement with that, this idea. Because I'll tell you, as I was going through the week this last week, at one point I just kind of stopped and I said, what are you agreeing with? What are you agreeing with? Because I don't know about you, but there's times where I find myself agreeing with things that are not beneficial. They're not helpful. They're not aligned the appropriate way. Today, we're gonna continue this study of agreement, and we're gonna look at it through a number of different passages here. But what I want to really give you as maybe the starting question for our study today is what do I do when God says something about me that I have difficulty believing? What do you do when God says something about you that you have difficulty believing? You see, oftentimes what God does is God asks us to believe something or to agree with something about ourselves before we see it. Um, and when that happens, I think I mean, for those of you that like to sleep through class, and there's times I don't blame you, I'll give you this note. Take this note. There's times when this happens that God isn't asking us to believe in ourselves. God's asking us to believe in Him. There's times when we go through this, and the take home is not to believe in yourself. The take home is to believe in God. So, a couple of weeks ago, Trace and I were in Florida, and Florida in the summertime is hot. And if you've ever been in Central Florida, especially in the summertime, it is not uncommon for the middle of the afternoon for there to be a thunderstorm. Like heavy rain comes through, and a lot of times it breaks the heat, it breaks the humidity, and then it's kind of pleasant in the evening. But while we were down there, I believe it only rained one, maybe 2 days of the 6 or 7 days that we were down there. And to that end, it was not only hot, but the humidity was just off the charts. Now, we had a little bit of this past week where, essentially, if you went outside and did anything, you would sweat. If you went outside and you blinked your eyes, you would sweat, and it wasn't just at Spider-Man. So there's times I was sweating through my eyes at Spider-Man, right? But to that end, we were out and about, and I'm sweating, and Trace finds this funny that I'm sweating, and she takes a picture, and she sends it home to the kids. And now we're not going to put the picture on there because some of you are eating and you don't need to see this. But she takes this picture and she sends it home to the kids. Now, what I want, no, I don't remember how I was standing up. We're gonna have to have that conversation some other time 'cause I seriously don't have any idea what you're talking about. But but this is what I want you to know because we're talking about agreement. We're talking about agreement. Now, I want you to know that my kids need to come into agreement with who God created them to be. My kids need that. And I'm sure that God created them to be kind and loving towards their father. But one of them, specifically the youngest one of them, thought that Trace was sending home maternity pictures of their father. I was st- I was standing up. That's what I was doing. Now, For those of you that are taking notes, especially the men in the room, I will tell you this. Young men, please make note of this. Men do not get maternity weight. They get male-ternity weight. And I will tell you, when the male-ternity weight comes on, it does not come off easy. It does not come off easy. Now, I tell you that story for a laugh. Um, but I suspect we all know someone who would like to lose a couple pounds, right? I suspect we all know. And what I would ask that if somebody came up to you and said, "Hey, I'm looking to lose a little bit of weight, or I'm wanting to get in shape," what would you say to them? You look great. You already look great. Okay, that's one way to look. I suspect there's a lot of us that would come into agreement, that we would offer encouragement and we would offer agreement in that scenario. I suspect we would look for, hey, you know what? If you dropped a few pounds, I'm sure you'd feel better. All those different things. Um, and I suspect that you would find yourself in fast and wholehearted agreement. But what if the tables were turned? What if it was you? What happens when you are the one that wants to change or needs to change, right? Suddenly, man, it's not that easy. You should do this. You should do that. I've tried that before. It doesn't work. Oh, I have a weakness for potato chips and Coca-Cola and cinnamon rolls, and the new one is Reese cups. Um, any Reese cup fans in here? Anybody where a Reese cup is not your number one favorite candy bar? Like, a couple of you. I was gonna say it's pretty high on a lot of folks' lists. Um, really, I stick with the classics, Linda. I appreciate that. This pretzel and caramel stuff. Yeah, yeah. I'll stick with the classics. I very much subscribe to the idea that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So that's where I am. Now, if they say I want to make it bigger, I'm okay with that. The jumbo cups, whatever, those are all things. But as I was thinking about this example and just the ridicule I was taking from my children, and just for the record, the other two did not defend me. Um, so like they all need your prayers. They all need your prayers. Some of them more than others, but they all need your prayers. Um, but what happens when God says something about you that you have difficulty believing? What happens? And I'm going to start out. What do I do with my? Oh. What happens when God says something about you and it seems big or it seems different? It seems challenging. God says, "This is who you are," and then you say, I can't believe that, or I don't believe that. That resonate with? That sound familiar to any of us? Yeah. What if God says, "I have something for you to do"? And here's a hint. That's the stories that we're looking at today. Got something for you to do. And your response is, "I don't think I can do that." And I suspect we can all find examples of this in life, right? We're going to concentrate probably more on this aspect of it today, but we're going to start out, and this is not an uncommon story whenever you look at a study of identity, but it's the story of Gideon. Gideon, Judges chapter 6, verses 11 through 16, the story goes, the angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak at Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Right? This is what God says. This is who you are. And Gideon replies, "Pardon me? Pardon me, my Lord, but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian." The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" Verse 15. "Pardon me, my Lord," Gideon replied, "but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." The Lord answered, "I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none alive." It's interesting. And in this story, essentially what we have is God says to Gideon, "You are a mighty warrior." And Gideon's response boils down to, "You've got the wrong guy." And then, and the thing was, is he had reasons. He had, and you might even suggest that he had valid reasons. You know, he talked about his clan and his family, his position. He talked about his insignificance. "Pardon me, my Lord," Gideon replied, "but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." But in this story, and we know how the story will turn out, God sees something that Gideon does not yet see. And God knows something that Gideon does not yet know. And so, one of the things I want to encourage you with today is that God's calling is not always based on who you currently appear to be. Now, I don't know this history real well, so I need your help potentially, but I'm suspicious that you may not know this history real well. Out of curiosity, who has heard of the historical person Joan of Arc? Okay, quite a few hands go up. Now, what do you know about her? If I gave you a blank piece of paper, what would you write down? That was about where I was. Burned at the stake. That's how her story ends. Patriot. So let's take a step back, and we're not going to go into all the because there's a lot of sensationalism around Joan of Arc. So I'm going to give you some very basic things to try to prove my point here today. We'll keep it simple. There are movies out there. There are series. I'm sure there's tons of books. You could find all sorts of things. But what we're going to do is we're going to sort of set the stage. Who has ever heard of the 100 Years' War? Few of us. All right. Now, who was the 100 Years' War fought between? All right. So the 100 Years' War. Don't ask me to draw the map. I'll embarrass myself. But the 100 Years' War was fought between 1337 and, anyone want to take a guess? 1453. Close. And it was more than 100 years, right? That's why it's called the Hundred Years' War. It was between England and France. And this is what's happening. So there's this war going on, and it's going on forever. Now, in the year 1412, Joan is born. Now, she's born in some small town in France. Her family was poor. She was a peasant. Obviously, Joan is female, so she wouldn't have been brought up to be a warrior or a soldier. Because she's a peasant, she has no noble blood in her family, no military credentials. And according to the story, when she was about 13 years old, so we're going to say 14, 25-ish, she got an order. She got the order, and it was that you are to help liberate France. Now, there's part of this that kind of mimics Gideon, right? Now she claims that it was an angel, whatever. We're not going to get into that part, but she was given some noble task, and so she would eventually leave home, and she would go find the local captain. Right now, and I'm sure there's a French pronunciation, and I'm not going to do that well, but Baudricourt is how it looks to be pronounced in straight English. And she goes to the captain and says, "Captain, I've been called to help liberate France, and I want you just to turn the table and be the captain for a moment." What would you do? Sends her away. She comes back, says, I've been, God wants me to lead this liberation of France. And, keep it in mind that there was this connection between religion and the crowns in those countries at the time, because that plays into her eventual demise. But eventually, the captain says, "All right, go ahead." What type of crazy is that? What type of crazy is that? I mean, just think if you're a soldier, you got a 13, 14-year-old girl now that's going to lead you into battle. Well, she would lead them into battle, and she would turn the tide in the war, right? She would eventually be captured by the English. She would be interrogated, what are you doing? She says, God told me to do this. They accused her of witchcraft and blasphemy and all sorts of different things. The end result, as Tim pointed out, she was burned at the stake. I think it's a fascinating story, and I'm sure I'm not doing it justice. It definitely requires more research. But I would ask that you consider that in this particular, the angel goes to Gideon, the angel, let's say an angel goes to Joan. I don't know what the reality of it was, but do you think Joan thought at first, yes, of course I would be the one to lead this liberation? I don't know that would have been her first thought. I would imagine that she would have been scared to death. And I would imagine that she had some doubts. Because when she shows up, what does she know about warfare? What does she know about fighting? What does she know about any of that? She doesn't know anything. So when God tasks you with becoming the person he created you to be, it doesn't automatically make you that person. You have to become the person capable of doing that thing. Joan had to take steps before she knew exactly what steps to take. And she had to take these steps before she knew how the story would end. We're going to have to look at later in this study, and I don't know when, but we're going to have to look at does God still call people, and what do you do if God calls you? How do you know it's really God, right? Today, what I want us to at least consider is sometimes the person calls us to be doesn't look like the person you would expect to get that assignment. So sometimes the person God calls doesn't look like the person they will need to become to fulfill that calling. Gideon, he did not have the right or the expected backstory. He didn't come from a powerful tribe or a powerful family, anything like that. But we see that this happens on other occasions throughout Scripture. Story of David, 1 Samuel chapter 16. We'll look at verses, well, I'm going to, how am I doing time-wise? I'm doing terrible time-wise. I'm going to tell you this story. Samuel is sent to go anoint the new king. The king Saul's not doing what God wanted him to do. God says, that's it, you're done. I'm going to get a new king. It's going to be on my timeline, not yours. This is what it is. So now Samuel is sent to find this new king. So he's sent to the house of Jesse. Jesse had several boys, and Samuel says, well, hey, bring your sons out here. And the first son he looks at, he's like, this has got to be the guy. God says, no. And he says, you have any other sons? And the other sons are brought before. And whenever it's all said and done, it's like, well, no. And are you sure you don't have any other sons? Oh, we got another son. He's out looking at the sheep. He's looking after the sheep. Well, go get him. When he comes back, God says, that's the one. That's the one. Now, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. This story happens before David faces Goliath. So there's something, this works better if I have the right board on. God says to David, you are to be king. He may not understand that at all, but he finds himself on the battlefield. David is anointed to be king before he fights Goliath. It's not that David fights Goliath and then because he defeats Goliath that he becomes anointed king. That's not like the reward. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 32 through 37, it said, David said to Saul, let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him. Saul replied, you are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You are only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth. But David said to Saul, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. David steps forward and he volunteers. And why would he do that? And I would suggest to you that he is able to do that because he is starting to come into agreement with who God says he is. He was stepping into the identity God had prescribed for him. And he would ultimately take the action. Jump ahead to verse 45. David says to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day," and if you don't have this verse underlined, underline this phrase. Highlight this phrase that's coming up. "This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands. And I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." And what I want to point out here to you is David's attitude and his posture through this. David's not out there saying, "I'm a wonderful person." He's out there saying, "God is wonderful and God is faithful." And I think that's an important distinction, because David's confidence is not confidence in David. David's confidence is confidence in God. So when we talk about faith, faith may not necessarily be believing that I'm capable of anything or everything, but faith is believing that God is capable of accomplishing what he has called me to do, even when you don't understand it, even when that maybe it doesn't make sense to you. Moses, Exodus chapter 3, verses 10, 11, and 12. God says, "So now go, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." But we're going to go in a different direction, right? Moses says to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" God says, "This is who you are." Moses says, "I don't believe it." God says, "I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain." God says, "I've got a job for you. I'm sending you to do this." Moses says, "Who am I? Surely there's somebody better than me." And God's answer is not that he gives him a personality assessment. He doesn't say, "Hey, you have hidden leadership potential that you don't know about yet." God says, "I will be with you." When God gives you your identity, when God gives you your assignment, you may wonder, am I enough? And the answer to that may not be yes, especially in the state that you are right now. But the answer is absolutely, God is with me. God is with me. Luke chapter 1, starting at verse 26, it reads, "In the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a town in Galilee, to a virgin pledged to be married to a man named Joseph, a descendant of David. The virgin's name was Mary. The angel went to her and said, 'Greetings, you who are highly favored, the Lord is with you.'" Mary was greatly troubled by his words and wondered what kind of greeting this might be. But the angel said to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary. You have found favor with God. You will conceive and give birth to a son, and you are to call him Jesus. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over Jacob's descendants forever. His kingdom will never end. Mary's response: how will this be, since I am a virgin? The angel answered, the Holy Spirit will come on you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. So the Holy One to be born will be called the Son of God. Even Elizabeth, your relative, is going to have a child in her old age, and she was said to be unable to conceive, and she who, let me try that again in English, and she who was said to be unable to conceive is in her 6 months. For no word from God will ever fail. Mary answers, I am the Lord's servant. May your word to me be fulfilled. Then the angel left her. Mary gives a different response. You see, as we looked at Gideon and we looked at Moses, it's like God says, hey, I got work for you. And their response is, surely not me. Mary gives us a different response. Her response is kind of like, okay, but how does this work? How does this work? How can this be is the question that she asks. And I think that's an important question for us to at least be equipped with. Questions aren't necessarily rebellion against God. I would actually go so far as to say I think it's okay to ask God questions. I think it's okay. And I can remember sitting in this sanctuary probably 30 some odd years ago, and I heard a preacher say something to the effect of, it's okay to question God, it is not okay to doubt God. And I thought, that's one of those phrases that has stuck with me for many, many years. You see, Mary didn't understand. She questioned. She asked. She had to ask. And you know what she did? She listened. How can this be? And then the angel gives her a response. Like, how many of you have questions about the angel's response? I mean, read that response. But when we get to verse 38, Mary says, I am the Lord's servant. May your word to me be fulfilled. She agrees. She finds herself in agreement with the challenge that God has given her, with the mission, with the assignment that God has given her. She says, I am the Lord's servant. I want you to know that it is completely okay to say to God, I don't understand. And you can say, I don't understand without refusing. The disciples, another interesting bunch. Acts chapter 4, verse 13 tells us, when they saw the courage of Peter and John and realized that they were unschooled, ordinary men, they were astonished. And they took note that these men had been with Jesus. They were unschooled, ordinary men, yet you know what they were doing? They were changing the world. They were changing the world. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 26 through 29, brothers and sisters, think of what you were when you were called. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many were influential. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. And God chose the lowly things of this world and the despised things and the things that are not to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before him. God deliberately chooses people the world would not necessarily choose. I don't know how I would ever fit it into this, but there's an interesting story. There's a couple of things I'll throw in here. Uh, One of the things is that God loves ordinary people. And you know that because he made so many of us, right? There's a bunch of us out here. We're ordinary people. Yet we live in a world where we think that you have to have certain things, or you have to be from a certain place, or you need to get to a certain place for certain things to happen. And this is not a new idea. This is an idea that goes way, way back. This was a thought that was shared with me several years ago, but it's there's I guess a lesson that was given thousands of times by a preacher from Philadelphia named Russell Cronwell, and it's called Acres of Diamonds, and he talks about how you have opportunities all around you, no matter where you are. You see, and even in Philadelphia in the late 1800s, people didn't think Philadelphia was a place where things could happen. They thought, you got to get to New York City. You got to get to Boston. You can't be in Philadelphia. But the reality is that God puts ordinary people all over the place to do extraordinary things. And I'm sure you've heard this phrase before, so you may take the note, but I don't know that this will necessarily be new to you, but God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. He, he, he equips you, he develops you. He calls you. Now, when he calls you, it doesn't mean that you're ready. Was Gideon ready? Was Joan ready? Let me go through my list here. Was Moses ready? Was Mary ready? Were the disciples ready? I would suggest to you that none of them were ready whenever they were called. They had to go through a process. They had to become, they had to come into agreement with the things that God said about them to become the people that they were created to be. So, what does God ask us to agree with? I'm going to give you a couple of statements here. Here's the first one. God says, "You are my child." How do you respond to that? Hopefully, we say, "I agree." God says to you, "You are forgiven." What do you say to that? Now, keep in mind, we studied forgiveness for what, 22 weeks or some extraordinary amount of time. Hmm? Thank you. Oh, you're welcome. That's what we say. You say thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. But hopefully we agree. We say the forgiveness was given. Yes, you accept it. I agree. I agree. I have been forgiven. Here's one. You are gifted. This one gets a little bit tricky because I think it's so much easier to see the gifts in other people than what it is to see the gifts in yourself. That's my take. That's probably skewed, but like it's easy to see some things that some people are so naturally good at. They are gifted. And I think one of the things that I can at least reason with is if God has given everybody else in this room gifts, then maybe He's given me one. Maybe. Right? So I'm going to suggest to you that this statement, when God says, I have gifted you, you can say, I agree. And then God says, I want you to do this. And there's some blank that's filled in. I want you to do this. Now, I want you to keep in mind, what are we answering? We're saying, I agree, I agree, I agree. God says, I want you to do this. And if we look at some of our examples here, what was Gideon's first response? I can't. What was Moses' first response? Oftentimes, what we find is I can't do that. And this is where the agreement comes in. But I want you to know God has a follow-up. He says, I want you to do this. And you say, I can't. And he says, I am with you. Have you ever had a conversation? I'm not going to make eye contact with Trace because she's going to tell me that this is exactly what I do. I'll stand at an angle. Where there's a statement, there's a response, and then the listening stops. Statement, response, listening stops. Got something for you to do. You have got to be kidding. I'm done. Boom, turn off. And I'm telling stories on myself here. This is something I have not listened for too long. Something I haven't listened for too long. Gideon and Moses said, I'm not capable of doing what you're tasking me to do. Bible records that they did what God asked them to do. Some people might say, I'm not qualified to do what you're asking me to do. That'd be the story of Joan of Arc. That would be the story of the disciples. Some people may say, I don't have any idea how that's going to, I don't understand this. That's the story of Mary. And so what I want to encourage you about agreement today is this. Agreement doesn't necessarily mean that you feel confident. Agreement does not equal confidence. Agreement can mean I am scared, but I'll take that step. I am scared, but I'll take the next step. I am scared, but I'll take another step. Agreement can mean I don't understand, but I trust you. I'm willing to do it. Agreement can mean, I don't know that I am capable, but I have seen all the wonderful things that you have done. And so I will trust the one who is calling me to do this. Agreement can also mean, I don't know what God knows and I don't see what God sees yet, but it sounds like it would be an interesting ride. Remember how easy it is to agree with something for someone else? I'm thinking of doing this. I'm thinking about going back to school. Well, yeah, you should do that. Yeah, you should do that. I'm thinking about doing it. Yeah, you should do that. How easy is that to come in agreement with somebody else? You can see the potential. You can see that future version of them. You can offer the encouragement. But then again, if it was us, there's all sorts of reasons why that wouldn't work for me. Go back to school now? You've got to be kidding me. But maybe that's part of what we're doing when God calls us. God sees something that we don't yet see. And what he's asking us to do is he is asking us to agree with him. The question I want to leave you with this week is this. It is not a question of what is God calling you to do. That is not the question. The question that I want you to wrestle with this week is, what has God already said about you that you are struggling to believe? What has God already said about you that you are struggling to believe? And I think we're going to have, I woke up this morning and I thought, how did I put this lesson together and not include Jonah in the story? So I'm going to wrestle with that this week coming up as well. But I think there's an additional question is there something God has clearly asked you to do that you have been resisting because you don't believe you're capable of? Is there something? And if the answer to that question is yes, the follow-up would be, what would agreement look like? What would agreement look like? And in the most practical terms, what is one thing you can do in agreement with that today? What's one step you can take? And I'm going to tell you, it's going to be so easy. That one step has to be so easy that you can do it right now. God says to Moses, I need you to go to Pharaoh. The easiest step that Moses can take is taking a step towards Egypt. One step, right? That's all this is. God's calling you to do something. What is that easy step? Gideon didn't feel like a mighty warrior. David didn't look like a king. Moses did not feel qualified. Mary didn't understand how it could happen. Joan of Arc didn't look like a military leader. The disciples didn't look like world-changing leaders. But God doesn't ask us to agree with our own assessments. God asks us to agree with his assessment. And I suspect that that's where many of us find ourselves today. God has said something about you that you have not quite learned to agree with yet. You haven't quite come into full agreement with that. Maybe you've been waiting until you feel ready. Maybe you've been waiting until you feel confident. Maybe you've been waiting until maybe you had a better understanding of it. And I'm going to suggest to you today that perhaps the simplest thing you can do is agree. Not because you are enough, but because he is enough and he is with you. That's where we're going to stop today. You want to go ahead and stop the recording. I'm going to ask, how am I doing time-wise? I'm